everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah, my wonderful, soothing voice is coming through the microphone. Okay, y'all can hear me in the back. Yeah. I promise you won't hear my voice for too much longer because I'm going to introduce us. But I would love to welcome you into this amazing space called Making Worlds Bookstore and Social Center. If this is your first time being here, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. If this is not the first time and you're coming back, welcome back. We love to see your face again. So we are a nonprofit co-op bookstore, which basically means that we are a collective. We're a group of folks who come together to really make sure that this space is operating and coming back and giving back to the community. So we are very much focused on providing access to information so that folks can come together and have a space to do that and come in as they are, and to provide those resources that you can come together as a community to collectivize if you need to organize. How can we educate you to do that? And also on other fun topics like anti-capitalism and anti-fascism, right? So we can really dive deep into some of those fun topics too. Really super excited to have both Paul and Gene here today, who will introduce themselves a little bit further to talk a little bit more about the book, Labor, Power, and Strategy, which is so fantastic because it directly aligns with our mission, vision, and values here at Making Worlds. So not only are we going to be able to dive a little bit into the book today and also hear from y'all too in the audience and hear from our speakers, but we also have additional topics here and books on the shelves that you can even expand your knowledge further. And this is also a space for y'all as the community members. So just as we host book discussions and we have speakers coming in, this is also a space to come together and to support each other. So we also have the Mamiya Library and Study Group space in the back here, which I'd love to point out. This is how we make sure we provide education that is accessible to everyone. You can come, grab a book off the shelf, sit and read it, and then put the book back on the shelf. Those are not for purchase. These are for purchase, and these are for purchase to support the store itself. But we try to make sure that that is a space that folks can come, grab, learn, grow, and come together. Right now, for example, we're having a community reading group around the book called Take Care of Yourself, which is super fantastic, talking about self-care from a community perspective versus just a self-preservation and it's all just for you, right? And how we need to heal together collectively, especially because our trauma is sometimes experienced collectively as well, right? So we host fantastic events like that as well. So with all of that being said, I don't think I shared my name, but my name is Kayla. So if you do need anything and all of that fun stuff, be like, yo, Kayla, I need some help, and I'll come and help you and assist you. We also have some other fantastic collective folks here and volunteers here to help out. We're always looking for volunteers too, so if you're interested in volunteering, come talk to me. I'm gonna sell it all the time, and we're gonna tell you all the amazing reasons why you should come volunteer with us. The bathroom is here in the back. If you do need the bathroom, please feel free to take that whenever you need it. And we will have a Q&A portion, but I think there's gonna be some engagement and interaction as well. So, feel free to ask your questions too throughout the process, because this is not a dictatorship, so right? Not yet, right? So I think without further ado, I think I've talked a lot. I'm going to hand it over to our fabulous speakers today, so welcome.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kayla, and Making Worlds Bookstore for hosting this. It's a great, lovely space. Yes. Buy the books, read them. So hi, I'm Paul Blundell. I'm the chair of the Philly DSA Labor Branch, which is co-hosting this event. And I'm also an Amazon worker. Woo, yeah. And there's a number of other Amazon workers here with me, and we're in the process of organizing ourselves into a union, building worker power, at a modest little company. Warehouses across the river. And, reading this book, which is, I think does a very good job of creating a pretty readable dialogue that calls out a lot of the big themes and questions in how it is that workers build power strategically within society to transform it, transform our lives, and transform our politics. And I think these questions are incredibly important to me and to us organizing at Amazon because of the very scale at which Amazon exists. Like, we have to be thinking about a lot of these questions or hopefully we'll have to be thinking about a lot of these questions as we go forward. So that's something that very much interests me about this book. And Gene is a contributor to this book. Gene, Philly native and lifelong labor organizer, union, one-time union president, campaigner, many other roles that we put in the event description, and a personal mentor to me and to us here at Amazonians United, and also a mentor to the Amazon Labor Union up in New York, which you all might have heard of. First big union election victory at Amazon. So Gene is here to talk about the ideas in the book, and then we'll be opening it up to discuss particularly how these books, or how the ideas in this book relate to union campaigns and struggles perhaps that we've been engaged in, and then we'll open it up for general questions. So, Gene.
Thank you. Great to see everybody, and this is a great space. I've never been here before, but these kind of spaces are sacred in us to be able to build movements. You got to be able to go somewhere where you feel comfortable and where the ideas that you believe in are sort of part of the institution, and obviously we don't have enough of them. So this is one of these places where most of the books that you see on the shelf, if you had nothing to do but sit around and read, you'd probably be interested in reading. So that's a good quality. So this
First, can people in the back hear okay? Or?
Oh, yeah, actually, yeah. I'm going to do this just makes it a little easier on me. But just the sort of the context here for a book like this is that in some ways this is, I've been in the labor movement, most of my adult life. And this is a really a unique moment from what I've seen. On the one hand, the labor movement is shrinking. The numbers, the percentage of people, hey John, the percentage of people that are in the labor movement, the percentage of the labor force that's organized, the absolute numbers is gone down. But on the other hand, the favorability of unions is higher than it's been. Like, I don't know when the last time it was as high, maybe 1936 when they occupied the auto plants and everything. But there's lots of new organizing happening at this moment, at Amazon and at Starbucks and in the art museums, and in a lot of cases, not necessarily from the established unions. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And sometimes traditional workers, sometimes non-traditional workers. But really also at the moment when everything that we see and know is threatened by really a ultra right-wing takeover. I mean, something like we've never witnessed in this country. And it's really in some ways imminent, and whether it succeeds or not is up to us. And I think that one of the places where you can really exert power is at work, because in the end, a capitalist society, power is based on its ability to make profit and to build a superstructure. And a museum is really part of the superstructure around capital, to sort of just like the media and all that to help make it work. So all these pieces are sort of in play right now. And so this book was just came out last year, in this past year, and it started with an interview with somebody who almost nobody knows. This guy John Womack. If you go to Mexico, he's famous because he's one of the foremost writers about the Mexican Revolution, and he learned a lot of and he ended up at Harvard, but he learned a lot from looking at the Mexican Revolution and trying to analyze what succeeded and what didn't, and the workers' movement, So he looked at things like the Railroad Workers Union, and trying to understand the power of that union, which was one of the main ways things moved, and had this sort of insight that there's maybe 30,000 railroad or 50,000 railroad workers, and there's 300 dispatchers. And what if those 300 dispatchers walk off the job? That shuts down everything for those 30,000 workers and for the whole country. So he ended up on this path to really sort of think about how do you dismantle the power of capital? How do you find the vulnerabilities and the connecting points that if you interfere there, you can really exert power? And it's sort of a polemic, in the best sense of the word. He putting out something really saying, how do we actually take power over industry? And if you can take power over industry, then you can take power. And for the most part, the labor movement and also the left, it doesn't really think about power. It seems so remote. Much of the labor movement is happy to just get a good contract, let alone have real power or electoral power. And he's challenging that whole question. So on one hand, it's sort of way up there. On the other hand, it's like very strategic and tactical. And he looks at sort of, if you look at the key industries and the logistics and the supply chains and manufacturing and communications, he's sort of harking back to the 30s in some ways. And he's basically arguing if you can figure into how to interfere with the logistical networks in this country, then you can achieve power. And I think we saw that hint of that recently with the railroad workers. Because, if the railroads, two of the biggest railroad unions are in the Teamsters. The last thing I knew, the Teamsters drive a lot of trucks, right? And they drive them in and out of ports with the ILWU on one end of the, sort of with the whole left tradition, the ILA around here. And what if the port workers were talking to the Teamsters and to the railroad workers, and they decided enough was enough? Literally everything could stop. And how would you do that? And where are some of the most vulnerable points? So this is sort of what he writes about. He calls them the choke points. And really, part of what he argues is not only does workplaces have that, but systems have that. Economic systems have that. Cities have those kind of choke points. And so you can think about every struggle you're in, whether it's a nursing home or teacher or a university or whatever. What are those choke points? It's sort of a way of thinking. So like in Amazon, you have these giant warehouses, but then you have some of these jobs which people could call indirect roles, which are like water spiders, jam clearers, people who work on the docks, positions that if you just remove them, or those people sort of all went to the bathroom for a couple hours, that everything could sort of stop. And so he's sort of arguing that you have to organize that way, to really be able to exert power. And it's it's really talking about the ability to disrupt, the really disrupt the smooth flow of the economic system, which capitalists depend on the smooth flow of the economic system. That's how you make your money. This is an interesting moment because while it's not happening on a national level there, you look at what's happening in France, where they have a different kind of labor tradition. And they might have, and England just now, where all the healthcare workers in the whole country, because they have a national health service, and all the teachers, and then huge sections of the transportation workers. We're in this moment where neoliberalism that sort of rescued capital, coming out of World War II, capital in this country was just succeeding. We dominated the world because we had more or less destroyed a lot of it in World War II. So Europe was in tatters, Japan was in tatters, most of the global south had no ability to compete. So we dominated. Ultimately, by the 70s and into the 80s, the rest of the world was catching up, and for a variety of reasons, profits weren't working, and that's sort of the whole generation of what we call neoliberalism, cutting taxes, moving manufacturing abroad, more regulations. That's sort of run itself out right now as a successful strategy for capital. And the question is, what's going to replace it? And they have some ideas that are even worse, obviously. And so nothing is certain. So this is a book from the labor perspective about how to think about it. But what's interesting is, while Womack puts out the sort of big picture provocative stuff, then there's a series of 10 of us that maybe you would call practitioners, who've been out in the field doing this stuff. Maybe we also write and stuff too, but people like Bill Fletcher and Jane McAlevey, Peter Olney, and everybody writes a response, mostly short, saying yes, but. So it's not a book where the superhero writes these brilliant things and everybody goes, Everybody went, yes, that's brilliant. But you're forgetting this thing, John. So, for example, Bill Fletcher. The folks heard of Bill Fletcher? So Bill has a long history in various forms of the freedom and civil rights movement, international movements, labor movements. And Bill sort of says that, you have to really understand the link between labor and the community, and that you can't underestimate the power of race and gender when you're sort of organizing and understanding the contradictions. And he's saying it may not always be in the biggest, most important, significant industries where you're going to build your movement. What happens if the labor movement, when the Memphis garbage workers went on strike and electrified the country, what happens if the labor movement at that point decided to take advantage of that moment to organize African American workers, maybe the garbage workers in every city or public work sector? That was an incredible opportunity, and sort of reflecting in a way on the idea that which Womack talks about, but not in a way that maybe it's needed. And he's not trying to say everything, but Karl Marx said around the time of the Civil War and before the Civil War that labor in the white skin can never triumph while labor in the black skin is in chains. Just that one sentence is incredibly profound and characterizes not only the founding of our system, where not only the black skin, but the native skin, but even today. That's a fundamental division in our system, which, and what he's pointing out, this whole idea of people talk about white skin privilege, but he's trying to point out the idea that you may get a benefit for being white, but fundamentally you lose. You'll never be liberated. You may get an extra dollar than this guy, but you're both going to lose. And that's a really, that class concept of racism is really important. Because if that's not true, if racism is really to the advantage of white people, and that's where some of this white privilege gets confusing, then we have no hope. Because if it's really better for me, then fuck you, But that's not really the way it is. As someone that's organized, and all of you that in organizing workplaces, you see that the way this breaks down solidarity and keeps people in their place, and actually that so-called privilege covers over a lot of people's humanity, actually, because you start seeing somebody as sort of less than you, and once you go there, then you've sort of closed yourself off. So anyway, so Bill raises some of that stuff, and Jane McAlevey said, well, this is good, but I've worked a lot with these huge teacher strikes and nursing strikes. When the teachers strike and they shut down the city of Chicago, the CTU or the UTLA in LA, then you bring to a close like huge sections of the city, and you paralyze hundreds of thousands of parents who can't go to work because their kids aren't there, and the whole infrastructure of the city is in danger, and you can't misjudge the power of those forces, including the fact that these are women-led fights, you know. So that was sort of her yes, but. And there's a guy named Carrie Dahl who, Carrie spent a number of years working with the BMWE, these are the people that lay the track, you know, building and maintenance away for all the railroads in the country. And Carrie got hired there to build a solidarity network among those workers who are dispersed in wherever the tracks need fixed. You could be working here today and there tomorrow. So Carrie says, yes, but if you don't do that internal membership mobilization and solidarity work inside your own organization, you're not going to be able to do any of this other stuff. Then Joe Ochoa, who's a longtime veteran of labor and Chicano struggles in the West, talked about the importance of building allies with other social movements, that you have to understand how these things fit together. There's a lot of sort of struggle in the book about how do you think of all these different pieces. I think I was the only person who wrote a chapter that talked about choke points, the way that he talked about it. So I'm just going to tell that one story, which is that, how are we doing? Okay. I was the coordinator for the Justice at Smithfield campaign. And this was Smithfield pork, Smithfield bacon. Smithfield is one of the giant international pork companies and meat companies. And they had a plant with 5,000 workers in North Carolina, in the rural southeastern corner of North Carolina. And there had been years of fights in the 90s where the union had elections and the company just walked all over them. I mean, we're talking beating up people in front of the NLRB and having the lights go out while you have armed marshals standing around the workplace while people's come to vote. That's called a ULP, right? And by the time I came in around 2006, the union had said, forget that. We're not going to just file an NLRB campaign. We need to figure out a way to take on this company and disrupt the production and their brand so they come to the table. So one of the things that happened, and there's a lot more to the story, and there's a tremendous film of the about this if people ever wanted to show it because it was a victory. That at some point, this is a plant that kills 32,000 hogs a day, 8 million a year. So you're on a line, there's 2 shifts, so that means 18,000 hogs a day come past you. And whether your cut is this, or this, or this, whatever it is, you got to do it a lot, you know. And so there were actually a couple walkouts there, but they're mostly led by immigrant workers around immigration issues. But we were continually trying to figure out ways to disrupt production. And at one point, some of the workers from livestock came to us and said, you know, we're really pissed off. We work in livestock, and livestock happens to be when the trucks pull up with these pigs that have been, now they weigh about 280 pounds, and they've been in these tiny little pens ever since they were maybe a month old, where they can't even move, and then they put them all on these giant trucks. They're like enraged animals. And then the trucks come to the plant, and they open the doors, and all these hogs stampede in, and there are 90 workers out of the 5,000 whose job is to get these hogs into these gates and eventually to the kill floor. And so these people came to us and said, you know, we're really pissed because we're literally dealing with these filthy hogs. They're not, hogs actually are pretty smart, but, you know, they're lying around in their own manure. And, you know, we can't even wash our hands. They don't even have warm water and soap for our hands. We can't even get a drink of clean water because they leave the water thing out right there. And sometimes the hogs lean up against the spout we're supposed to get our water from. And so we started this campaign. Inside the workers were like talking to each other, you know, one by one. They did a petition. They marched on the boss and demanded it. The boss put them off. Meanwhile, the organizers with the workers were visiting everybody in their homes and sort of validating the importance of this issue to people, which, needless to say, was widespread. You'd like to be able to have a drink of water and not have to, and be able to wash your hands when you want to have your lunch. So once we got to the point where we thought we had it and the company was saying no, they made one more ask. The company said, go to hell, and they just sat down. So meanwhile, they're sitting down at 5:30 in the morning, and the trucks are rolling in. And it's one thing to get these 32,000 hogs out of the truck and into the plant. You try to put them back into the truck. That's really tough, you know. And so these workers just sat down. And these trucks are just piling up, and some of these hogs are getting off the trucks. And the workers, the company came running in, screaming and yelling, and then came back 10 minutes later with letters of warning for everybody. And everybody just sat there. We had some good leaders in there, but every single person in there had been a part of this strategy and had a chance to talk about it. And meanwhile, one of our leaders gets on the phone and calls OSHA and says, we just want to let you know we're sitting down in the Smithfield plant, which is the biggest hog slaughterhouse in the world. And they're in gross violation of all these OSHA regulations, and you should probably come over there and do something about it. Then, at the same time, we had our entire national network immediately alerted, and people are starting to phone call in and email. We didn't have as many social media things as we have now. But they shut the company's phone system down. And then Reverend William Barber, who was in North Carolina, was a big participant in our campaign. He came out in front of the plant and is praying for water. Let them have water, God. Let them be able to wash their hands, you know. And all these people out there, oh, God, please give them water. The company's like... and so anyway, that was it. You know, the company eventually, by the end of the day, OSHA's running around. The news media is calling in, and we are funneling all the news media calling in into all the workers sitting on the floor. Why are you sitting on the floor? Well, ma'am, I've been here for 10 years. I still can't wash my hands, you know, and, you know, but quoting the workers, not me, not the organizers, right? And so the company gave in, and within 48 hours, they had built an entire shed there with warm running water. They had refrigerators, microwaves, the whole thing for the people who were there. Of course, everybody in the plant knew. And then during their breaks, the livestock workers would all come in with their T-shirts, and they'd march over to the cafeteria where there'd be like 1,000 people eating lunch, and they'd start chanting, and everybody would look up and they'd say, we're the livestock workers, and they'd tell the story. And that was 90 workers out of 5,000. And it was that kind of ability to threaten the company without anybody even, in this case, nobody even went on strike, you know, that eventually made the difference because the company decided they just couldn't do their normal production. They were too busy trying to figure out how to stop the workers. So Anyway, I'll stop there, and there's much more to say, and there are probably a lot of things that people here have to contribute, and I'll turn it back to Paul, and we can go. I'll just say this. We can go anywhere that you possibly want to go, high up, low down, practical, theoretical, and that there's no dumb question. So if you think you want to ask a question, but it's maybe a dumb question, then that's the only dumb part about what you're thinking. All right. Oh, you got your...
Yeah, I wanted to say a couple of things that what you were talking about made me think of, and then I'd like to turn it over first to some of the folks at the PMA union who have been through a recent union struggle to talk about how these ideas relate to that, and then we'll open it up more broadly. But one of the things when you were talking about was like turn to neoliberalism, and it's like a very high level like concept and thinking of the whole economic system. But really, like that move where we had cutting of taxes, we had basically capital turning to trying to figure out how to rescue profits by pulling money out of the government, by pulling money out of the public and redistributing it to the wealthy, rather than just trying to create profits through manufacturing and production, which they'd been able to do for a long time. I think it's relevant to when we're thinking about organizing at Amazon, because a lot of what Amazon has done as well is figure out how to pull in public subsidy, avoid taxes, avoid various things in order to funnel money up into the corporation in that way. So I think like this is something where our first struggle as Amazon workers is to figure out how to build worker power at the warehouse in order to push back against the punishing rate of work and the injuries and the low pay and the disrespect by management. But ultimately, if we're thinking about how to organize at this corporation, if we want to be like transformative citizens of the world, like we have to also be thinking about what will our power eventually lead to in changing the type of company that Amazon is and how it relates in society, right? How it is that we create value and not just how Amazon management is able to pull value from the public into the pockets of Bezos and the other investors. I also, speaking of the Memphis sanitation workers, I just wanted to let everyone know that the waste management sanitation workers in Camden are on strike right now with Teamsters 115, striking particularly over the company's attempt to put driver-facing cameras in the trucks capable of live streaming. So there's a picket line going on over in Camden, and if anybody wants to show solidarity in any way, talk to me afterwards, and I'll make sure you get connected. The last thing I wanted to say when you were talking about, the way that race can be used to divide in the workplace. To come back to the book, also, like there's a point that I found very interesting in the interview with John Womack, where he talks about the concept of comradeship. And he references particularly this speech that was given as a eulogy by a fire chief in New York after 9/11. And the concept of comradeship that he talks about is that like we are engaged in a common work or a common struggle together, and we respect each other because of that. We need each other to be the best that we can be in order to accomplish this like common project that we have, even if we don't get along. And I see that every day in my work at the warehouse, whether it's over, racial difference or whether it's immigration, like country of origin status, or whether it's age or whether it's ability or whatever. There's all these ways that people are divided in the workplace. And all of it divides us to the benefit of management's ability to push us to work ever faster, to break our bodies for profit, etc. And it's a constant cultural project, I think, for us, for any organizer, to work through those differences and show people we have a common interest, and if we can see each other as comrades here, as people who need each other to be the best that we can be, that is like how we forge that unity that allows us to accomplish our common aims, and then we can get back to disliking each other. But so I wanted to turn over first to Adam. Do you want to talk? Adam from the Philly Museum of Art union to give a few remarks about the recent union campaign and strike that you all went through, especially as it relates to some of the ideas raised in the book.
Thanks. And then Alex is here, and Paul Dannenfelser is here also, who worked on the campaign. So I've been working at the museum for 8 years as an educator, and we started organizing back in 2020. And unsurprisingly, they fought us every step of the way, hiring Morgan Lewis and Bacchius to represent them at the bargaining table, and really just trying to draw out negotiations as long as possible. And it got to the point where we had to take action. So in October, we went on a strike for 3 weeks. And as it relates to the book, I really enjoyed the book, but, I was thinking about, as art museum workers, we couldn't shut down a production line, right? We didn't have, the ability to even to shut down the museum, given that the way the museum is structured, there's about a 1-to-1 ratio in terms of management to bargaining unit members. So when we went on strike, they were able to stay open throughout the entire length of the strike. Granted, they had senior, management folks working retail, working at the ticket desk, which wasn't a sustainable kind of project, but they were able to stay open nonetheless. But we had to be really thoughtful about the timing of the strike, and so we planned to go out just as they were starting to install their big exhibition, the Matisse Show, which just recently closed, which was intended to be kind of a blockbuster exhibition that would bring visitors back into the museum post-COVID. And, and even with that, timing it with the installation, they hired scabs in from New York to install the show. It wasn't completely installed. When they said everything was fine, when the show opened, there were barely any labels on the wall. There were some artworks missing. As a visitor, you might not notice that at first, but it was clear that they had struggled to get that show hung. So I think the absolute kind of pressure points that we were able to kind of push them back on them with was first off through local politicians, folks at city council, at the mayor's office. A lot of you may not know this, but the museum building is owned by the city of Philadelphia, and the museum leases it from the city for $1 a year. The museum also receives millions of dollars every year from both the state and the city. So we were able, with city council support, to kind of freeze some of the money that was going to the museum, that was promised to the museum. There were even threats that from City Hall that they would force the museum to renegotiate their lease on the building if they didn't come to an agreement. So that was really powerful. At the same time, ultimately the decision to come to an agreement with the union was in the hands of our board of trustees. And that rested in one woman's hand, Leslie Ann Miller, who's the chair of the board of trustees. And she is the classic neoliberal. And, she's an attorney by trade, an extremely wealthy art collector. And I think she lives out on the main line, of course. And she is a big supporter of a lot of politicians who are running for office, Democratic, progressive politicians. So, Josh Shapiro, for instance, she's actually on his advisory board still. So we had a pressure point there where we actually, there were a couple of, I'd say, strongly worded phone calls made to Josh Shapiro's office and to Josh Shapiro himself, saying that he needed to kind of get Leslie Ann Miller in line, so that we could, or else they would, not support Josh Shapiro and his campaign anymore. So that was really powerful. There were a couple of instances like that. We had, believe it or not, the former head of Verizon and now the ambassador to Canada got involved and started talking to the board of trustees. And so there were a lot of kind of outside forces that we were able to kind of bring together to put some pressure on them. And then that was very powerful, but also the community was extremely important. We had so much community support. we had a really wonderful social media program, and that's mostly due to Alex, who's sitting next to me. But we were able to galvanize a lot of support that way. Members were pulling their memberships from the museum. There was a lot of bad press around what was going on and the behavior that was happening. So, I mean, I think reputationally speaking, by kind of hurting their reputation in the community, that had a huge impact on them coming to a final agreement with us. And without that, we wouldn't have won everything we won, and we got everything that we wanted. So it was pretty incredible. But yeah, like it's just interesting in reading the book, thinking about some of these other industries where you don't have those kind of certain kind of very real pinch points. You have to get a little bit creative.
And I think in the book he talks about what he calls associative power, which is basically the broad public power that whether it's from churches or politicians or whatever. And in this country where the laws are so bad and the sort of legal protections and the right to permanently replace strikers and all that, if you're going to win a contract, you have to have a comprehensive campaign strategy. You shouldn't go into the fight. A lot of times unions just sit down with the company, thinking the boss is going to do the right thing, and then about a week before, it's sort of like a deadline, they realize he's not, and they tell all the members, let's go, we're going to go on strike. And there's no plan, and people aren't ready, and you really you can't succeed that way. But there are a lot of levers in every industry that you're in. You just have to sort of make that a part of your strategy.
Yeah, one of the things I think, like that's a big part of it of thinking about this associational power. But one of the things that I noticed in the book that made me think of you all is, and I don't know if I've told any of you this yet, even Alex, but when you first went on strike, a couple of us in the DSA labor branch were sitting there being like, they just run a museum. They're like, what is a strike going to do? Like how, and the board is all these, just the richest people, like, we're like, we're pulling for them, but I don't know, and what we heard from you all was like, they'll really care about this Matisse exhibit. And we were like, okay. But like in the book, one of the points that John Womack makes that I think is important is like I think a lot in like union reform movements or on the left, we're like, it's important that the union be democratic, like we want a lot of democracy. And I think a lot of times that's held up as one of two things, either like, it's good to have democracy, we should fight for democracy, but also like, we need people engaged so that then they want to go out on strike, they feel invested in it, like sort of the story that Gene was telling of like making sure that everybody is involved in the strategy and they feel invested. But the point that actually Womack brings out about the importance of democracy is neither of those. He talks about how, when he's thinking of choke points and seams and pressure points, he's like, this comes from an intimate knowledge of the production process of the work. And the people who know that best are the people doing that work. And so you need to have, like, those people need to be doing the analysis and forming the strategy because they know better than anybody else, possibly even better than the boss, where you can break things. And so then to have, like, museum workers saying, like, look, I've been here for years and I know these people will care about this Matisse exhibit. And then, the board came and settled with you, the day before the exhibit opened and gave you everything you wanted. And I was like,
it's almost,
okay.
Almost any workplace. You sit down with a group of workers that have been there a while and you say, how can we mess this place up? It's different than how can we go on strike, right? Which often maybe needs to be part of it. But that conversation can yield and if you say, don't worry, it's just us here, don't worry, legal, illegal, we're not writing anything down or whatever, we're just brainstorming. sometimes it's as simple as following orders. You know, like I was in a situation once with a factory of bakery workers in Ohio that baked huge amounts of these baked goods for one of the big grocery chains. And there's just about 10 of us there. I think most of them are like shop stewards or whatever. And we had this conversation. And what they were talking about, and this is not unusual, I think this is part of what some of the Starbucks were playing about, that they said, well, all the people running things just came out of Harvard Business School like 3 years ago. You know, they don't know a cupcake from a waffle, you know. You know, they just studied all this stuff, and they're carrying out orders. So this one guy said, yeah, so I work my line, and every day the supervisor comes over and gives me the formula for that day. You know, and it's always wrong. If I ever did that formula, it would be a total disaster. You know, so we sort of figured out a series of these things. You know, like I said, well, what, you know, maybe that's what we need to do, and they all started volunteering variations of those things. Sometimes that's called work the rule, but that could be much more elaborate than that. But some of that could be simple. You know, you could have 5 of your key leaders, you know, just following orders, you know, and, you know, it created a total crisis. You have to be then prepared for the company going absolutely bonkers. But anyway, other comments, and questions, or thoughts?
So like as you go, you develop your strategy. I think something that's it's very important to consider, and an issue that I've kind of run into in my organizing efforts at Home Depot is, you know, people will, you know, see the things that you're talking about, right? They'll kind of have like an idea of the power that they hold. And it's like, how do you get them to like actually, you know, go and to sit down at Smithfield and to actually follow through on these actions? Because again, like, the explanation and stuff like that, like people were there, you know, they'll kind of follow, but it's like that trying to get them to actually act and do something is
Right.
something that's very difficult.
Right. So, I mean, that's a process, obviously, of building relationships and trust. Different people, like in that livestock department, we had some good leaders who set an example. And they stood up to the supervisor, and they didn't get fired, you know, and people saw that. And there were lots of opportunities. That's why the home visits were possible, not to convince people to do it, but to listen to people. Because ultimately, the goal is to develop some kind of class consciousness. And in this country, under capitalism, we are taught from day one, you're number one. You can't trust everybody. You got to beat everybody else out in order to get by in the world. Every possible way to sort of think about yourself separate from everybody else. So most people have never been involved in a collective struggle, especially a workplace struggle. It's like the possibility of thinking about that is remote. But when you flip that, most people think that the company, you need the company. I need this job, right? That's sort of the most common perspective. And there's a story I like to tell about a waiter, a banquet waiter, and his job was to give out the butter and the rolls, and took a lot of pride in his work. And he was doing a big banquet for like a very famous senator. And he started putting out that everybody on everybody's plate gets a roll and a tab of butter. And he goes to the senator's table and he starts walking away. And the senator's assistant runs up to him in his coat and tie and says, hey, the senator wants another roll and butter. And he said, well, the waiter says, I'm sorry. Everybody gets one tab of butter and one roll. And the guy is just enraged. He says, "But do you know who that is? That is Senator such and such. And do you know what he's done? He's done this and this and this." And the waiter just sort of stood there very calmly and said, I know about that. Do you know who I am?" The guy says, "Well, who the hell are you?" He says, "I'm the guy that's in charge of the butter and the bread." So that's the flip that you have to get, where people can understand that the boss needs you, right? And the you has to be sort of collective. And that really can't come just instantly because you're breaking through that stuff. But you sort of begin to identify who some of those leaders are that can influence people, and you sort of build from there in small steps. And there's a lot more I don't mean to simplify it, but I understand the challenge.
So thank you both. I was also involved in the PMA campaign and organized now with the Ask Me DC 47, organizing broadly cultural workers, so like folks in libraries, museums, zoos, places like that. And so this question of like what are the kind of key choke points in the economy, it's something that Paul and I have talked about, and thinking about where we inhabit in the kind of broader, like you said, like the superstructure around capital. I think one of the key kind of, insights of our experience at the museum, and I also think I was a museum worker before this, so coming to it from the kind of shop floor of museum work, if there is such a thing, I think that we gained an understanding of how essential the kind of nonprofit cultural sphere is to like capital, and how the folks on our board, like how essential their ability to perform this kind of like philanthropic reputation scrubbing. It actually is like not this like ancillary secondary part of the kind of machine that's operating now, but it's actually like very central. At least in this city of Philadelphia, it's like very central to the operations of capital and power. So I think that was part of what I thought was kind of great about that campaign, was that it kind of exposed the hidden kind of economy of cultural capital in the city, and as Adam was saying, like a lot of folks on the board are the kind of movers and shakers in like progressive democratic politics in the city, and yet we're some of the worst union busters, out there. And I think it kind of, the folks who did show up, like for us, and the people who didn't, really made clear the kind of battle lines. But I haven't read the book. I'm interested to read it. I've read, I appreciate the summary and the summaries that Paul has shared, and just how do we? I don't know if folks get into it in the book, but like I feel like some of the conversation about choke points still is kind of a antedate, or like built on an earlier idea of the American economy. And I guess I'm just curious, like, how are we? Is there where do we see the choke points of the future kind of being, and how are we thinking like most critically about these choke points? Like I hear us saying that it's like the example of the Smithfield factory of like the 90 guys with the that's a very comparing that to like an art museum, it seems really different. But I do think that art museum was a choke point. We were able to identify an important choke point and win a lot for people there. So how what is the kind of like future of thinking through choke points in our economy? Is it just like what person is the most crucial to unloading this object, or are there kind of like more, I don't know, like abstract or kind of theoretical ways to think about like where the what kinds of choke points we can identify, whether it's something related to I don't know, digital technologies, or like some kind of thinking through of like global kind of the way that global capital kind of travels, like through the financial systems or whatever. But how do we? I feel like a lot of it is still like a very analog understanding of how labor operates, and how do we kind of bring that forward into the 21st century.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is is partly true, in that the economy today looks very different than it did when it was. I mean, we are not an economy based on manufacturing goods anymore. We're an economy based on capital itself and speculating on capital. We also make enormous amounts of weapons, but the commercial culture is vast, and that's where one of the reasons that the Amazon organizing is so important is that Amazon as a corporation, just if you look at the retail distribution, is tied to almost every industry in the country. It controls, which books are even going to be sold and who even knows about these books. It controls who else is producing what products and at what price, and it has through the control of data, they can tell you what you think you should need, right? Even getting into your brain. But yet it's based on the one hand, in the warehouses, the work of hundreds of thousands of people. On the other hand, the goods that they're buying from all over the world that are based on other work of millions of other people. Even my cell phone, which seems like it's in some other universe of digital blah, blah, blah. But if you break down what an Apple phone costs to manufacture, we're talking like $10 or $15 of actual materials and work that goes into an iPhone. So surplus value, that basic concept of I work in a factory and we produce 1,000 widgets and I get paid a certain amount and everything after that goes into his pockets, and that's a surplus value. Well, that is very much what has made Apple the richest country in the world. And it always comes back to that piece. Now a lot of that's hidden because it's in other countries. But the Amazon piece opens up a lot of those possibilities because it's the intersection between the distribution of huge amounts of goods and then huge amounts of transportation, but also the entire digital economy. Amazon controls 25% or 30% of the entire internet. Netflix is on Amazon. Big sections of state and federal governments is on Amazon Wireless Services. That's where the money is made, right? And I just, there's anybody ever watch South Park? People see the episode of when the internet went down and everybody's heading west, just like during the 30s, and they're looking for where there's some internet, and apparently some in California. And suddenly, somehow, Cartwright, or I don't remember it was him, but one of the main characters turns out knows what the problem is and why the internet's down. And you see this scene in a cave somewhere, and there's all these military people and business people, and a helicopter comes down, and Cartwright gets up, and he walks up, and all these people salute him and says, "Young man, we understand you know how to fix this problem." He says, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Well, please do it." And there's this giant computer in the background. Cartwright looks over, takes a look at it, goes behind it, takes the plug, plugs it in, it all lights up, and then all over the world, people can't say. So I have this image of somewhere that in these Amazon wireless facilities, all wireless ultimately is wired physically in these gigantic warehouses. A lot of them are in Northern Virginia. I mean, these things the size of 10 football fields of where they're storing your photograph, of your beach trips last summer are in one of their being stored in this place somewhere. Pardon me? You're right. Every photograph. And I just have the image of like, if we can, they don't have many people working in there, but if when the Amazon workers shut down places all over the country, that we put in the call to one of these people, we say now, and he goes, psh, and just closes the switch, right? And that's it. All commerce happens, closes. But so there are still a lot of these choke points, but there is sort of the whole global superstructure, the amount of money that is made off of cultural stuff, including Amazon, right? And the museums are the way for the ruling class to, like, first of all, they get a tax break, and also they're creating the culture mostly for themselves. I mean, other people are allowed to walk in, but it's their building anytime they want, to have their Matisse exhibits. And so there are many ways to attack that part of the structure and to link it, like in the Smithfield campaign, and this is true with a lot of companies, brands really matter. You were talking about the brand. Brands matter for institutions, for universities and school systems and so on. So Smithfield's brand really mattered, and they hired Paula Deen. People ever heard of her? So Paula Deen, who was a Southern cooking whatever, who made a legend about who she is, which she really isn't, was hired by Smithfield to travel all over the country. And this was in 2006, 7, 8. I was astounded. I never heard of this woman. She has a cooking channel and sells these cooking books. And she would go into town and they would rent a hall with like 1,000 seats, and people would pay all this money to see her stand up on the stage, talk about cooking. And but this was the brand. She was selling Smithfield brand. She was their marketer. And so we decided to go after the brand. And we went after Paula Deen. And she had this image of somebody that really cares about workers. So we wrote this letter from workers, and we put it on these giant 25-foot signs that everybody signed. Said, Paula Deen, we know you care about workers. When will you meet with us? And when she went into these halls, in the middle of her giving the speech, we had a local minister and some workers walking up front with this big plaque. And then she went on a book tour, and there were all these people lining up to buy the book and get their autograph. And we'd have a half of those dozen of our people in those lines, but they didn't know that they were us. And as soon as we got to the front of the line, they unrolled the scroll with the letter from the people, And Paula Deen, we found later because of the court cases, was begging the company, get these people off of me, And ultimately the brand had as much to do with the settlement as the interfering with production. And brand carries in a lot of other places. Other questions?
I wanted to quickly to call back to the book. I think that one of the points that Womack brings up around worker power is we can think about, you all found this particular choke point for reputation laundering for the board, and we're able to press them very effectively, get your contract. He talks about thinking about choke points as, sort of that as the lowest level. It's like, can you win things for yourself in your workplace? But when you're thinking about these choke points for the larger flows of society, where can a small group of workers basically have the leverage? What's the biggest lever we can make that can change society in this way, And so we could compare maybe, thinking about museum workers and thinking about the railroad workers, where the very possibility that they might go on strike got presidential and congressional action very quickly, in order to prevent it. So I think that's when we're thinking about what are the choke points of the future, it's thinking about, what is the smallest group of workers that can create the largest crisis for the whole system. And reputation laundering, or, the creation of a culture that justifies the system could be one of those, right? Being able to change the way that capital or the ruling class is able to justify themselves, get people to be thinking only of themselves and not of the collective, could be one of those. But it might also be, can we stop the goods from moving in from all this offshored manufacturing? And I mean, the thinking about, I guess the two little other stories with that is like being at Amazon and thinking at, what's the smallest number of workers here? There was a day a couple of years ago where I came into work and there was no work to do, and we spent the whole day playing cornhole in the drive lane. And we found out later that what had happened is that there was an intern in corporate who had put a bad line of code in the software that runs the entire fulfillment center network in the whole country. And that one bad line of code put in by one intern shut the entirety of Amazon down for most of a day.
That was Cartwright's cousin.
Right. So, this is like thinking, okay, wow. Like, what's the smallest number of workers that has the greatest leverage to disrupt this giant company? Turns out it's this one intern, right?
And by the way, the tech workers in the headquarters in Amazon are organized. There's a whole movement inside of that building in Seattle, and they have other places, but in the main headquarters there, that are organizing and that understand the importance of the relationship with the warehouse workers and the drivers and the other sectors. But the other thing that's interesting is that Womack is actually talking about taking power, which the labor movement generally doesn't think about. Thinks about how do we get a good contract. But what happens at the conversation at the Central Labor Council in Philadelphia? I know you've been to a few of those meetings. What happens if the agenda was, we represent hundreds of thousands of workers in this city, and we're all hurting in all different ways. What could we, if we were to combine the power of all our unions, how could we take over this city? Can we have that conversation? That would be a hell of a conversation. Let me speak for the 75,000 building trades workers. Let me speak for the shipyard workers, right? He's really talking about thinking that way, in addition to these sort of very pragmatic. So in a way, he's thinking of the Mexican Revolution, right? But he's not thinking of it in a fantasy sense. He's thinking of it, how do you think of it strategically?
Yeah, and you mentioned, and then we'll take another question, but you mentioned in passing the French unions right now. And if you haven't read about what's going on in France, you should. The government is again making an effort to raise the age at which you start collecting a pension. This is not an issue for any one group of workers. It hits workers everywhere, and it hits different workers differently. The power sector workers, a relatively small number of workers in the country, have gone on strike around that pension change, and have gone on strike in a way that they are shutting off the power to government officials and giving discounted power to the poor and the workers. And that's like, okay, what is it about, like, how can we as workers think about what our power is and then use it for more than just getting a better contract, so.
Other questions or comments?
Just a quick time check. We have about 15 minutes left, so a couple of my questions, yep.
Hi, thank you both for this, and I haven't read the book yet, but I'm looking forward to it. My name is Rosalind. I've been organizing with Unite Here for 22 years with hotel and food service workers, and thank you. Many years, decades to make it a good union, but yes. I appreciate many of the points, and especially how the best strategy comes from really listening to workers, and how you build the best strategy that way. And I had two thoughts just listening. One was just in this question about the choke. I mean, I think that these are really interesting questions, and the organizing of Amazon is incredibly inspiring. I also think that we shouldn't discount the transformative power of strikes in general, and also the democratizing power of strikes, because every group of workers that I've been connected with that have been out on strike, it transforms people's lives. It transforms who they are. The boss can never ever take back. They can take back, you can get back money, lots of things. That transformation is sticks with people forever. It changes our whole country and world. So the more that that's happening in whatever sector, we have that kind of militancy. I think it's I think it's extremely valuable, even though these are important questions of where to focus, but just to think about that. And similarly, every strike I've been involved in, people were permanently replaced, and then not permanently when we won. And the other thing, though, we are at this key at the very beginning. We talked about how someone spoke about how the union membership's going down, but yet unions are extremely popular, right? And then the person here who's at Home Depot, right, talking about the challenges of organizing your coworkers. Our experience is still that people are very, very afraid still, right? That afraid, and that the work of these things, the work that it takes to actually push through that fear, which you learn the best in actually doing the organizing, I think, but also talking more about how do we do that. And there's lots of salting going on, which is terrific. And then many people that are salting are coming from very different backgrounds and the people they're trying to build relationships with, and which gets into the racial and gender and educational and class differences that you guys were touching on. So I just think, I'm curious just how we push that further, because I think that despite the popularity and some of the key visible campaigns out there, there's a lot of work to be done, and not the sexiest work to be done, right? But that to push through fear, right?
Right. Thank you. And Unite Here has been a model in a lot of fights, coordinating companies like Marriott, where you're striking them all over the country simultaneously, and probably one of the main reasons we won Pennsylvania and Georgia these last couple rounds was because of what Unite Here did. Even when the companies weren't employing their members, they brought them out, and other unions gave Unite Here money because they couldn't get their members out, but maybe they could support them. And so Unite Here has played a really good role. But the challenge of actually getting through the fear, which goes both from the individualism that we've been taught with and the lack of experience of sort of not living in a collective culture, living in an individualized commercial. Now you don't even go to the movies anymore. You sit in your house or you sit in your room with your phone and watch the movie, So it is, you can't underestimate that fear. There's this moment in the film about the Smithfield campaign, which is a really powerful film if somebody's ever interested in showing it. But there's an interview with this one woman where she says, I was afraid. I'm finally, after all the work that we did, I got that fear out. And once I got that fear out, nobody could stop me. And that's sort of the thing that you sort of flip. And there's really no magic there. It's sort of like this really, and if you try, and this is the the challenge in a lot of our organizing drives, if you think just because everybody says yes once, that means you got everybody, because the minute the heat comes down on people, and I'm sure you saw this at the union, at the Home Depot fight, like everywhere else, when the company comes down on people, half of that sort of crumbles if you haven't done the proper preparation work. Because most people have never experienced the intensity of an anti-union campaign. And most people can't imagine that the boss is going to actually be that outrageously mean and disgusting and so on. I like my supervisor. She would never do that, or he would know. I mean, maybe she wouldn't, but when she's told that she has to, she will, But it really does come down to like building relationships with people, listening to people, And a lot of organizers are not very good listeners, unfortunately. Every organizing manual says you're supposed to, when you do a house visit or an interaction, you're supposed to do like 2/3 listening and 1/3 talking or whatever. But too often it's flipped and we're sort of like salesmen. But if you could go in and sit in a break room or whatever, and you can spend 15 minutes getting a worker talking about their life and how did you get to this country, or how did you get here, or what's it like for you to work, and tell me about, the healthcare problems that you're having with your kid or whatever. And you sit there for 15 minutes and don't say anything else, except, you've done incredible things to just sort of keep your family together. You probably organize that person better than ever you read them the entire Das Kapital or whatever, So that's sort of part of what we have to learn about being good organizers.
My name is Peter. I recently moved to Philly from Chicago, and thinking about local politics and if there are political choke points that connect with this discussion. One thing I've heard discussed in the context of like labor standards and all the violations we see in the U.S. because the penalties, the enforcement is so weak. What if county and local governments, rather than just giving a token fine for, not paying workers their sick days, et cetera, suspended their business license, right? Or, sort of ways that the government can kind of help workers gain some leverage to actually shut down, particularly restaurants and retails where it's very dispersed. And so I'm curious, what kind of opportunities, promise you see in, using especially local government as a lever in that way, but also the risks because, we've heard that there's kind of no shortcuts, right, when it comes to building the rank and file worker power, and strikes are a critical tool for that. So if you rely on some of these political levers, does that maybe take your focus away from that kind of rank and file organizing?
Yeah, good point. And by the way, Philadelphia is a good example where I think you're putting a lot of good people into office, and maybe you got this mayoral election, you got people like Helen Smith running, and so there's a lot of that happening, local fights all over the country, and whereas the Republicans have figured out how to control states, which the Democratic Party has just sort of given up on, and they're doing incredible damage. There's a tremendous amount of opportunity to get things through the local city. But the key point I think you're making is if I'm the president of local A, and I have 10,000 members, and we give, city hall councilors, blah, 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 $10,000. And then when it comes to something, and I come to, that council and say, we need you to do this. That's one thing, but if you do that based on your membership, and you make those demands as part of your fight and part of the whole fight, like in Chicago, where they have, like everywhere else, a housing crisis. The union pushed the politicians of the city to address housing by raising it to teachers' union in collective bargaining as part of this whole movement of bargaining for the common good, where a lot of public sector, but not just public sector unions, are trying to incorporate demands in their bargaining that impact people outside of bargaining. And so the CPU, and they did this at other places, LA and all, raised the issue of affordable housing. Rutgers University higher ed unions are doing this. And the city said, well, you're not allowed to talk about that, because it's not a legitimate issue of bargaining, which under the law is sort of defined. The teachers union, of course, was publicizing it to all their hundreds of thousands of parents who are fighting for affordable housing. Said, well, we have, I think they said 15,000 homeless students. So when our students come in and said, we couldn't do our homework last night because there wasn't a flashlight in the tent. That affected education. And they essentially refused to settle unless this was dealt with, whether they were allowed to do it or not. So I think just sort of that kind of, and Rahm Emanuel and Lightfoot and all those people can be pushed by that. But if they're pushed by it, I think that's true with our politicians in general. I mean, we've seen unlimited numbers of people we thought were good politicians go in and sort of compromise. But the labor movement really has the ability to hold people accountable if we do it in a really organized fashion. And it's not just a matter of who can sit around. And this is the same thing on the national level. It's not just a matter of who Joe Biden invites over for coffee. You know, that's nice, you know, and then you owe Joe a favor just like he owes you. But it's a matter of doing that as part of our movement. And when you do that, people feel that power. And if you do it otherwise, people feel powerless. Don't even know.
So I think we have about 5 minutes left. Maybe time for one more question before we wrap it up. Maybe if we can be maybe succinct with it. Yeah? How you feel about it? Yeah? Cool?
Sure.
Okay, go for it.
Sure.
I'll wrap my 3 questions into one, into like maybe one question into one. I'm a city worker. I'm in the same union as the Philadelphia Museum of Art union as well, at a different local. The city workers in Philadelphia are required to live in the city. They have a residency clause. So because of that, there's certain programs that have kind of been like geared towards city workers for affordable housing, but they're very like limited. So I think that kind of gives, we are hearing a lot from like members that like some people want to get rid of the residency clause because they're feeling the effects of gentrification. So I think that speaks to kind of like your last point of like not of tying in with our living conditions, with kind of going beyond just regular things that we bargained for in a contract. All right, so that's, I guess I'll shrink into 2 really fast. Yeah. Also, I think that the Philadelphia Museum of Art, not just that they had a strike, but I think that was kind of a big deal for our union. They did open bargaining, or at least like some form of it, where maybe not the whole staff or the members went to the bargaining table, but they had the bargaining committee, caucus with the entire members, and that whole process was very open and transparent. And I might get in trouble with some staff members, but the last couple of contracts were very closed in our union. The last one under a totally different administration of union leadership would not tell anything, and we had to kind of go into one building, see the contract for the first time, and then vote on it. We thought that this would kind of change. The last time there also has been a change but it's kind of less of a change, more of a shift in leadership, where we thought that there would be some sort of opening, but ended up being kind of like the same game plan, where we would go see the contract and vote in a building during the workday, and then some workers got together and organized to demand that we have a mail ballot, which we were able to do. So I guess one thing is like, I'll wrap it up. City. You mentioned city workers theoretically have lots of power without city workers approving zoning plans or license inspection plans. We can't have real estate development in the city, which is like the main source of capital. So there are lever points, but I think what is essential is like, how as an organization, union of thousands of people, members, how do you kind of get to the point where you not only understand that theoretically, but understand it strategically, and use that as a point to kind of organize members getting ready for the next contract campaign?
Yeah, and I'll just say quickly, and then I know we have to close, but look, the labor movement needs to be transformed. You know, this idea, which we know, and there's a lot of examples of bargaining in the sunshine, you know, that the times when people change, as the sister was saying from the United here, biggest changes are strikes, and strikes are connected to fighting for your contract when you got everybody's attention in a different way, or when you're organizing a new place. These are, now, you could have other kinds of fights around grievances that a lot of people, you bring a lot of people involved on and stuff, but those are really key points. And doing your contract fight by involving everybody in the unit and bringing everybody into the room one way or another is incredibly empowering. It terrifies the company, it excites the members, and union leaders a lot of times are scared of that. And to be honest, if they don't want to involve people, they really shouldn't be. People should organize against them. I'm sorry, you know, for any of you that fit that. But this is the way that we win, you know. And Jane McAleese has written about, she actually has a new book coming out this month. A lot of examples of sort of bargaining in the sunshine, where, and actually, one of the ways I learned about it was Local 26, you know, here in Boston. Dominic Pizzato was the president many years ago. And they used to bargain in the gymnasium. And on one side of the gymnasium were like a long table with people from all the hotels. And on the other side of the basketball court was Dominic and all the representatives of all the hotels. And behind them in the stands were 500 workers. And the company says the wrong thing, and the workers just sort of erupt, you know. And everything that happens there is a lesson in how corporate power works. And those 500 people go back in the next day and say, "You should have heard," and they all become the educators. And that's really the way to build a union, and everybody should do it. So I'll just say, buy this book. If you don't want to buy it just for the book, buy it to support the bookstore and buy some other books. And go ahead.
And we're giving the final word to Pallavi from Jobs of Justice.
Thank you, Paul. Is this on? Yep. Oh, wow. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Pallavi. This is just a quick PSA. I see a lot of individual and coalition members of Philly J with J. Please check in with me. We got books for you all. And we're not an exclusionary group. So I also want to pitch an invitation to folks to join Philly J with J. We are just about 25 years old. We've been in the city for a long time. I can't look at Paul, John, or Mary because they've been here since the beginning, so I'm going to get this right. In 2008, we supported the security guards at Temple, Penn, and the PMA to win an independent union, the Philadelphia Security Officers Union. In 2018, we led a campaign to win Philly's Domestic Worker Bill of Rights. In 2020, through the Penn for Pilots campaign, we won $100 million from Penn to put towards the remediation of lead and asbestos in our public schools. And we are currently working on a campaign to win new health and safety protections for delivery and warehouse drivers in the city. And we have a large coalition. We are out on the picket lines with the PMA union, with TUGSA. We are fighting with the UArts faculty and staff union who have gone 2 years without a contract. And we are active members of the No Arena in Chinatown coalition. So please check in with me if you want to sign up for an individual membership or pick up your book. And thank you, Paul, Gene, and the staff at Making Worlds.
Everybody should be in Jobs
You're
of
great.
Justice. It's a great organization. You can be in 10 other organizations too.
Also, rally in New York on Wednesday.
Woo! March 1st.
I just want to say that I like to close a meeting the way Cesar Chavez does. And Cesar Chavez always said that when we're in the union movement, we have to do everything together, and that includes clapping. So he used to close the meeting like this.